Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So this weekend is the Australian Grand Prix. It's the first time that we're going to be watching the Australian Grand Prix. Last year I watched some bits and pieces of it, but it was several weeks after it actually had happened. Apparently it's typically a fun race.
I don't think I've watched anything on it.
I've heard, I don't know if it's because it happens at like midnight for us, but I've heard people really enjoy this one. I think it could be because they're a little delirious. But when we watched Japan and Vegas, I don't think I was delirious. I more just was like, I want to go back to sleep.
Yeah, I don't even know if I don't want to say I don't enjoy them when they're at that time, but I feel like it definitely becomes a little, it's that moment where it feels like a chore. And that sounds terrible, but it's just
can you imagine how the Australian fans feel?
Oh, yeah.
It's every weekend for them.
Yeah. I mean, I also do think that for certain races, like the Australian GP, it's been happening for so long.
It's a historical one.
Yeah, I just feel like the vibe, there's so much more excitement.
Yeah, I agree.
I also, statistically, I'm curious if this is, that first big one, because I know Bahrain has, the least amount of spectators go to it. And so I'm curious if this is, that first, burst of fans.
Maybe.
Especially because, it's the only one in Australia.
Yeah.
It's not the easiest
it's
country
not easy
to get
for
to.
a lot of people to leave.
Or Australia. To leave.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited. A lot of history. A lot to be said about it, so.
A lot of the drivers have been there for the past couple days already.
Yeah, they're all.
last week.
They're already, I'm sure jet lag, it just helps.
Yeah, I think they honestly flew from, they flew from Saudi to Australia, or they might have gone from Saudi to, England for a second, and then to Australia, so.
Yeah. What's after Australia?
I couldn't tell you. I can't remember.
Tell you right now, because I'm what's the next country?
Is it Japan and China after that?
It might be. It would make sense. But anyways. Yeah, so I'm excited. There's a lot already happening. I feel like the race week is already kicked off earlier just because of the excitement.
But it also feels kind of dead at the same time. It almost feels like we're in F1 winter break at the same time.
Well, because there was so much drama, and now we're just
it's probably
quiet.
True. It's been very quiet the past few days.
Thank God. I need a break.
I'm a little curious. Why is it so quiet?
We'll see.
Guess we will see. I'm excited to see everyone, and we won't be seeing everyone, but I'm excited to see everyone come together and see the drama that happens. Not because I want drama, but because I want to know what's going on after 2 weeks of silence.
Yeah, I'm curious to see, when things are going to be announced this season.
Yeah.
We'll see. But
yeah. So, in this episode, MC's going to go over a former F1 driver, and then I'm going to go over a part of the car and kind of the history behind it. I think that's really all we're doing today, honestly.
Yeah, just typical get ready, back in the swing of things.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it.
Alrighty, guys. So, to stick with the Australian theme this week, our driver is going to be Jack Brabham, which we're pretty sure is how you say the name. We've just looked up a video and there's nothing. So he was born John Arthur, aka Jack Brabham, and he was born April 2nd, 1926 in Hurstville, Australia. I personally do not know Australia geographically, but apparently it's a town near Sydney. That's all the information that I was given. Jack's father was a greengrocer, and this is where he learned to drive. He used the delivery vehicles to learn how to drive a car, apparently very illegally underage, but that's how he did it. School wasn't a good fit for Jack, and so he ended up leaving school at 15, where he ended up switching and going into work at an engineering shop, and then he finally ended up in a garage. When Jack turned 18, which was in 1944, for those I would hope we would all know, it's a pretty prolific time in history. A lot of things are happening. So in 1944, he joined the Royal Australian Air Force since he really wanted to learn to fly. Unfortunately, during the wartime, because it's 1944, there was a shortage, and so he didn't get to join the Australian Air Force and fly the way he wanted to. Instead, he joined the Australian Air Force and became a flight mechanic. So he stuck with this whole mechanic theme. And then eventually got discharged in 1946, and he had an uncle who worked in construction and was able to build him his own workshop in Sydney. He then eventually opened up his own engineering establishment, kind of designing things. In 1951, he got married to Betty, who would end up being the mother to his 3 sons, and she would basically be a key factor throughout his career. Around this time, maybe even a little bit earlier, Jack got introduced to motorsport through a friend who was racing what are called midget cars. So midget cars, or speed cars as they're known, are a specific class of racing cars. So they're really, really small, and they have a high power to weight ratio. They've been around since the 30s, and apparently they're pretty prolific in the States, and they had a huge following, or they might still today, but they had a pretty big following around Jack's time. Like, I think one crowd was even like 40,000 people large. So he was in these small midget cars, and he used his engineering smarts and helped his friend build a brand new midget car. His friend eventually stopped racing at the pursuance to his friend's wife. She was like, hey, stop racing, but let's put Jack in the car. And so he ended up taking his friend's seat and was facing huge success in this circuit. Just so you guys know, midget racing or midget cars, speed cars, was typically done on dirt tracks. So most of Jack's early racing was done on a dirt track, which would eventually be something that could help him or not in F1 racing. He ended up winning the Australian Championship for this class of cars 4 times. And after the success of this, he wanted to go over to Europe. So he met with John and Charles Cooper of, like, the Cooper racing team, which I think eventually ended up into, like, Mini Cooper. Like, they had a huge kind of branch off. But he ended up meeting with them, who had the Cooper Car Company, and then he kind of became a partnership. He started a partnership with them. Like, it was even said that, like, he would show up at the Cooper factory and just ask for parts. And it went so far as, like, they just set him up a little shop. Like, he was an employee of Cooper, but they were like, he would just come and work. So he was literally working at the factory and doing what he loved to do. So he was building himself a bobtail mid-engine sports car. Look it up, bobtailed mid-engine sports car, Cooper to be exact. They're pretty beautiful. They're just like these older classic, what you imagine a race car. He ended up making his Grand Prix debut, his F1 Grand Prix debut, in this car during the 1955 British Grand Prix, but unfortunately he had to retire due to a broken clutch. He eventually shipped this car to Australia after success at a non-competition race where he was proved that, like, I can drive with these guys. He went on to win the Australian Grand Prix after shipping it to Australia in 1955, but ended up deciding to sell his car so that him and his family could move to the UK. So they needed moving costs. So he sold his F1 championship vehicle to pay for his move.
Okay.
1956, this initial move, he was not as successful, and at this time, Cooper was changing the way cars were designed, so they were putting the car engines in the back of the vehicle, unlike the front engines that the Italian and the German cars were using at this time. So, 1959, Jack ended up winning the 1959 Monaco GP, marking his first win in a Cooper, based off of, like, this car, like, front versus back engine became, like, a huge discourse. He ended up winning the British GP, but almost missed winning the Drivers' Championship of 1959 in the last race of the season, which was the US GP in Florida. He ran out of fuel with 400 yards left.
No.
He had been in the lead for lap, like, I think 6 through 41, but apparently what I was reading online, like, the race notes from, like, what had happened in 1959, apparently him and, like, some other engineer had a discourse on how much fuel to put in the vehicle, and Jack believed, let me have less fuel. So he ended up pushing it across the finish line.
Did he still win?
No, he came in 4th.
That would have been epic if he had still won.
But, like, apparently there was, like, one point where, like, I think McLaren might have been racing at this point, and so McLaren was going to slow down, but he kept waving off, like, just crazy.
No, that's like that one scene from Cars where the old guy ends up crashing and then lightning, like, freezes at the finish line and comes back and pushes him.
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been epic.
He did end up coming in 4th at the USGP, but he won the 1959 Drivers' Championship by 4 points.
Oof.
So, like...
Who came in second, do you know?
Cutting it close. No, because at this point, I think McLaren was on the track, Sebring was on the track, Sebring or Sterling, one of those.
Okay.
Sebring's the race course, is the racetrack.
But
and
maybe
Sterling
it was
is
named
driver.
after someone?
Yeah,
I don't know.
But there was, like, there was some big names back then. A lot of people were quoted saying that he won with stealth and not skill, because essentially he was just, like, such a low-key presence. Like, the night before, I think the USGP or another GP was up till 1 a.m, like, physically working on his own car.
Okay.
Granted, the racetracks and racing and teams were so different then.
Yeah.
In 1960, he dominated, and he ended up winning Holland, Belgium, France, Britain, and Portugal that year, and claimed title number 2. I'm pretty sure Holland, Belgium, France, Britain, and Portugal were all in succession, so, like, he just kept winning.
Okay.
In 1961, Ferrari ended up dominating that year. They just came out with a better car, and Brabham decided to leave Cooper at this point and create his own idea, which was Motor Racing Development, aka MRD. The team known as MRD Brabham rose in the driving world and started to see success in other formulas. Apparently, their car just, like, did amazing in Formula 2 and became one of those teams that was, like, a stepping stone for, like, a lot of prolific drivers. And then in 1962 saw the debut of Brabham Formula 1, which slowly became more and more competitive.
So, it makes sense. He was a mechanic himself, so he knew what made a car work.
Well, and that was what, like, Formula1.com literally said. They were, like, through him just, like, perfecting and, like, fixing and critiquing and changing the car.
Well, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen the Ford versus Ferrari movie, but it's kind of probably like a similar person. It honestly might be the same person. I don't think it is, but there is one guy, what's his name? Christian Bale. One guy. Christian Bale's character.
That one man.
Only Batman. His character, who was a real life person, I'm guessing, was a mechanic, and he, at this point, it was like the old, like, bug racing almost, and he was just work on his car himself, and then eventually Ford wanted to have a Le Mans team, and one of the guys at Ford, like, approached him and was like, this is the person we need, because he knows how to drive a car fast, but he also knows what makes it work and why it's fast. Yeah. And so he would be the one to give them actual tips on, like, this is why your car isn't working this way, because this is what's about to happen in about 30 seconds, and then it would happen.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that's what, like, probably helped, and we've seen that with other drivers from this time. Like, I don't want to say it doesn't happen as often, because I don't know how involved the current, like, 2024 drivers, like, they're not building them, obviously, but, like,
they have input in their cars, like Lewis has
but they're not
Mercedes car,
sitting here like, designing.
Max isn't sitting down telling Adrian Newey, hey, do this.
He's not building a chassis in the Red Bull factory.
That would be great.
So 1962 saw the debut, and then they just kind of slowly increased. Like, they didn't really have anything, like, stand out until 1966, which saw the new 3-liter come into effect. So at this point in 1966, Jack is a bit older than the rest of the track, and he convinced Repco, which was a manufacturer of automotive components, to produce an F1 engine from a venerable Oldsmobile V8 design. So essentially, he took, like, an ancient engine and was like, let's figure this out, and put it in an F1 car.
Sustainable.
With his Oldsmobile design and his age, he was pushing almost 40, which obviously is not that old, but, like,
in the sport, the fact that he's still alive.
Well, no, because, like, Jim Clark and a few of the older guys, like, they were in their 30s. Like, they,
but, like, for him to still be this involved at his age is insane.
So, with this Oldsmobile design and his age, the media took a lot of jabs at his age, nicknaming him Geriatric Jack, because earlier in his career he'd been nicknamed Black Jack. So, he took it in stride, and honestly, I haven't seen enough video footage of Jack. I don't know him personally. Obviously, like, it very much gives me the energy that Fernando Alonso would give, because apparently... at his, like, the race that he was debuting, this Oldsmobile and himself, he showed up with, like, a cane and, like, a giant, fake beard, and, like, his, like, the other drivers, like, jokingly helped him into, like, the car. Funny. So he took it in stride, and he went to win 4 races that year, and won the championship. So everyone made fun of him and called him old, but, like, his car, like...
Yeah, so he was literally the Fernando Alonso of his time.
He is the first and only driver to this day to win a car of his own make with his own name. So he designed his car. It was named after him. It's Brabham. Like, it's his own company.
And then he won a race.
And he won. He won the championship, not won the race. Yeah. He's the only driver to win.
That's a record that will never be broken.
Yeah, I mean, unless... Yeah.
It won't happen.
It won't happen again. 1967 saw continuous success for the team. His teammate Denny Hulme ended up winning that year. And then 1968 was pretty terrible. He ended up retiring from the first 7 races of that season. Oof. I don't think he performed well. There was 9 of that back then. And then in 1969, he ended up having a serious foot injury. The level of research I did for this, if you guys want to know, let me know. I'll find the foot injury. But basically, this started talks of retiring. His wife Betty came out and basically was like, "I'm constantly stressed, watching you almost kill yourself." His final season was in 1970, and his final victory was in the 1970 South African Grand Prix. He went on to sell the Brabham team and left the racing world and went back to Australia. He had a farm and a dealership and really loved to fly, so he did, a whole, flying. He loved, when he became an F1 driver, I think he took it,
Why do I feel like he went back to Australia and his life became secondhand lion?
I don't know, but, apparently he did, a huge, he did a trip from, Britain to Australia himself. Aviation became such a hobby. But he was finally recognized for his contribution to British motorsport, i.e. Cooper, i.e. just all the people that went through his team. Yeah. And he was knighted in 1985, becoming Sir Jack. He ended up passing away at home in May of 2014 at the age of 88.
Damn, it's a long life.
So long life, 1920s to 2014.
I must say, whenever we read about these really, old drivers from, they were born before F1 even technically existed, whenever we read about them and they end up, passing of, natural causes in, their 80s or 90s, I'm like, wow, you're one of the few because so many of passed in accidents.
Or passed in accidents of, other extreme sports or, other things, and... I wanted to focus because there are a lot of really important Australian F1 drivers. Yeah. Mark Webber was one I was thinking about. There was another driver I sent you a message about. Jack's own kids have been in the racing world. So there's a lot of history in Australia with motorsport itself, but I wanted to focus on someone who not only had the tie to Australia and the British racing world, but also someone who was I love talking about the guys from the 50s and the 60s. Oh, yeah. I wish, if I had more time, I would have, obviously you guys wouldn't listen to it, but I would have done more research on, specific races, there was one crash that he, got air and almost got run over by a teammate, but they narrowly missed him and he walked away. Oh, my gosh. It's, there's so much history in all of their races, and even, I think one race, he, the last, 2 or 3 laps, something with his fuel besides him running out of it, but something else. There's so much action in all of these races because was, and unfortunately it's because there's literally no safety. So anything could happen back then. But I think seeing the strategy and the organization of Formula 1 today, as opposed to literally the driver being up at 1 a.m., wrenching his car together, yeah, I just love it because it reminds me of the chaos of high school rowing.
Honestly.
Because it's just, like, I imagine people running around with, like, wrenches and just, like, cars falling out and wheels, like, just rolling.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is Sir Jack.
Awesome. Okay, so for the part of the week, it's kind of something that we've talked about before, here and there, but we've never really gone into depth on it.
No.
No, the floor of the car. We've never actually dived into it. There's some interesting things going on there. So, just so you guys know, actually, I'll start all the way from the beginning.
The floor was created.
the floor was existed.
Its origination
was a long time. No, I'm kidding. So in about the 1970s, so from between 1950s and the 1970s, the regulations were a little bit of like non-existent in F1 when it came to car designs. And the 1970s is about kind of when they started to think about maybe we should figure some stuff out.
Maybe the car should look similar.
Yeah, maybe we should have cars that are kind of the same-ish. So towards the end of the 1970s, some teams brought inspiration from other championships, like other kinds of motorsport, and then that also brought in some more chaos because you've got inspiration from like rally car, you've got inspiration from like IndyCar, like you have all these different things coming together in one, which is all great in theory, but also causes major chaos. And so from there was a lot of accidents. So the FIA decided that they were going to forbid designers from overusing the ground effect, which is essentially what we talk about nowadays when it comes to being really close to the floor, the floor being really close to the actual ground of the track. So the ground effect is essentially, I'm getting there, don't worry.
No, I was going to ask, prior to them making this rule, was it just like the crashes where like people's car was just bottoming out? Like
sort of, and I think also because of the ground effect, your car has like extreme speed. And so there was almost like so much downforce, but also you were going so fast that like it just wasn't safe for anyone. And they didn't even have seatbelts at this point in like regular cars.
Oh, valid. Yeah.
So you think they had them in F1 cars? So
I feel like mom and dad lie about that.
They probably did. But essentially the ground effect is the concept of like the floors being very close to the ground, and with that happening, the air going underneath the car then creates pressure pushing the car down, but then that forces the air underneath the car to move extremely fast, underneath it, which then also pushes the car even quicker, which then creates a much faster car, which in theory, faster car equals more championships, but also faster car can equal more accidents. And so they are basically forbidden from overusing the ground effects. So this is when they're starting to introduce the concept of regulations.
I thought you're about to be like the concept of safety.
Honestly, probably. No, just regulations on maybe like slowing them down a little bit. We don't need them to be as fast as possible.
Like guys.
All the time.
Like they need to stay.
So then in 1983 and onwards, the regulation required the floors to be flat. So everyone had like basically the same floor. Like you couldn't have the aerodynamics of the floors that we see today.
Okay.
But then in 1994, following the death of Ayrton Senna, they introduced a board positioned in the central part underneath the single-seaters that helps it to check if the models are riding too slow. This is the skid block, which we saw last year with Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. I almost said Hamilton at COTA at the U.S. Grand Prix, where they had too much wear on their skid blocks and therefore were disqualified. So if you have too much wear, that means your car is riding too low to the ground and it's going to wear down on your skid block and therefore you get disqualified.
They determine that by the it's like millimeter.
Yeah, not even.
Like
it's
not even
smaller.
It's smaller and they basically measure it.
Yeah. And in when it was first introduced, it quite literally was like a wooden block, but now it's like carbon fiber with like a some sort of gloss of something on top of it, so it's not actually gonna set on fire.
Yeah.
At least it shouldn't be setting on fire. You never know.
Yeah.
You never know with these cars. So with that, Actually, the flat floors were in 2022 with the regulation changes. They decided that flat floors were out, no longer. So 40 years.
Do you know something I just found out today? Do you know that they didn't award a point for the fastest lap for like 60 years? It wasn't until like 2019 that they brought it back.
Not surprised.
Yeah, sorry. I found that out today.
Some of the things reading about this, the fact that they had flat floors for 40 years, I was like, what?
On certain tracks. Can you imagine on some of those curves?
Yeah, no wonder the cars look so different when you can see the visible difference between videos of a 2021 car and a 2022 car.
Mm-hmm. But yeah.
They're so different. And so that also, just a side note on that, the flat floors, when those existed, that was Mercedes' reign. And the moment the flat floors were out, that's when Mercedes has been struggling ever since then. Yeah, there were other changes during those regulations.
But that's like the biggest.
That's a huge one. That the aerodynamics of that, not being able to master it, that's a huge aspect.
Obviously, like you said, like everything, there's so many different things that might be Mercedes' issue. But yeah, I'm curious if they've just struggled with that floor. Because I feel like the floor is that one thing that Red Bull has like...
They're so secretive about, because Red Bull has been working on, I'll get to it in a little bit. We'll get there. We'll get there. So, also in this year, like this current year, the board,
season?
Yes, the board's stiffness has changed because some teams have found ways to make flexible floors, which is what I'm getting into. Red Bull has found a way to make a flexible floor.
I feel like
What is happening in their brains?
I feel like they're all like, what is that saying that's like, don't ask for permission, like just ask for forgiveness?
Oh, that's 100% what it is.
Like, it just seems like, okay, they're like, we don't have them, they're not flat anymore, but now let's make them bendy. And they're like, how can we figure out, like, how, I feel like they're all walking around eggshells, and they're like, they're little kids that you're like, don't step out of line, and they're like,
I almost feel like that's a similar thing where, who was it? Williams in, like, the 80s, 90s with, like, the hydraulics or whatever.
Yeah.
And
where
it was like, don't ask for permission. Like, just do it and then ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, I think it was the 90s. And it was like they had done something, and then the FIA, I know what you're talking about.
FIA was like, we're not doing that.
No, and like that year they dominated, and then they've never.
They haven't quite gotten to the point again. So yeah, basically now where was it? It's possible. The reason why flexible floors are possible, it's because you're mounting the rear part of the floorboard in a way where it makes it flexible when racing. So basically the car can now ride closer to the ground without hitting the ground. So as the board flexes, it then returns to its original thickness. I don't know how they're doing it, because that's definitely some Red Bull top secret-ish.
You know
what?
But
I'm not surprised that they're figuring it out. When I think about Red Bull's car sometimes, I'm like, how is no one can compete, because they have essentially the weird no side pod, but like kind of side pods. They have a floor that's like a flexible floor.
You remember in the this is a really weird call out, just follow me through it. Okay. Remember in 2008, 2010 when those those crazy scientific restaurants were a thing, when they would make your steak but it's all foam? Those, that, everything's science, they freeze dry, and they, you know what I'm talking about?
Sort of.
Okay, anyways, I feel like Red Bull is doing all the weird science-y things that no one else is doing, but I also feel like it's just because Red Bull, and yes, there's the cost cap, and I understand that, but I feel like Red Bull just has the...
Well, yeah, this is also one of the reasons why they like to use wind tunnels, because you can't really put flow-vis on a floor.
Yeah.
And so the wind tunnel is going to tell you a lot about your floor. But I also wonder if that's why... Do you remember the photos last year of how... Was it at Monaco where we were all able to see Red Bull's floor, because they picked up one of the... I think it was Checo's car or something. And then everyone saw the floor. But then in another race we saw Williams' floor. And it was Williams' floors looked so archaic.
Yeah.
But I also just wonder if Williams, because they have had to have flat floors for 40 years, and with the transition in leadership and stuff like that, they just haven't had the ability to change the kind of floor that they're doing.
It's also thinking that mechanics and race engineers and race designers have been doing something for 40 years.
Yeah.
And now you're asking them, and it's the same thing that we're going to have in 2026. You're asking them to reinvent the wheel. And so to sit there and have them do it, like, obviously, Red Bull's probably been working on this floor for 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
You know, whereas Williams is 5 years behind.
Yeah.
So I definitely think, like, the floor is one of those weird things that it can show, like, the level of money.
I think it can also show the level of just who you have designing your car.
Yeah.
Like, of course, Adrian Newey's is going to be absolutely insane. Because they're trying experimental things. Who else would think to try a flexible floor?
Or a floor, like, how do you get it to
Bend
and then reform? Like, what is it?
I would not be surprised if that's going to be one of those things that the FIA is like, nah. You can't, because that's essentially like a workaround to having the skid board. That's what it's called, correct?
If the material is different, that's my problem, is that how is this not something that is a regulated material? Like, if they've done something to it that everyone can do that's made it flexible, but are they using a different, like...
I don't know if they're using a different material. I wonder if they just found a way to, like mount the skid block to ensure that it can then be a bit more flexible. But, like, I'm confused because when it comes to things like the skid block, because it's so regulated and, like, it does get measured every so often at races, I'm shocked that there isn't a specific place on every single car that it has to be.
Well, that's
and
the
it's
thing.
For safety as well. It's not even just for, like, oh, like, this car can't be faster than another. It's quite literally for safety. Like, it was introduced after Senna's death.
Well, and that's where I'm curious, too, is, like, if it's something that's put in, like the halo, like that, like, people can't fuck around with that. Like, they can't sit there and experiment, so why are they allowed to...
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know.
I mean, and granted, maybe they are, like, maybe we have not ripped open the regulations in a hot second. Like, maybe they're allowed to experiment with it, but I agree with you.
I don't think they are.
Safety aspect should be...
I don't think that the regulations, when it came to this, were as specific as... like you might think, because I wonder if when they were writing the regulations, they didn't think that somebody would have the idea to make it flexible.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there is any sort of, like, guidance, again, because I feel like there's not a ton with the FIA rules, but I'm curious if there's guidance to the fact that, like, why wouldn't a safety thing be a standard? Like, why wouldn't it be exactly the same for everyone?
I'm interested to see what goes down with this in the future, because I don't think it's going to stick around like this.
Especially since it's supposed to be measuring something. Like, like, in my eyes, from, like, anything we did to the boat in rowing, like, that would be, like, tampering.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Anyways, I don't know. Red Bull, give us a call.
All right. Well, that's all that I have for the part of the week. So now we are going to get into our final thoughts. Okay, just to give everyone an idea of how the race weekend is going to work, this is another race where the actual, like, first practice starts on Thursday, so just a reminder for that. The first practice is on Thursday from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. Central Time, and then everything else is at, like, midnight, so the second practice is at midnight for us.
We're in Central Time.
The third practice is later on Friday night. Quali is at the crack of dawn, is at midnight for us. And the race is at 11 p.m., so I'll probably just stay awake for the race then. I can't imagine it being more than 2 hours.
Yeah, I feel like the only one we go to sleep for...
was Japan and Vegas.
Yeah, Vegas.
That's it.
I don't know what the China times are this year. That's interesting.
I don't think the last time I checked,
it hasn't
they
been
hadn't scheduled...
announced.
Oh, they posted everything.
Oh, God.
That's not gonna be fun.
Well...
yeah... Well, we most of the time, we're fine. We wake up at, like, 6 a.m. for stuff, and it's okay.
We want to get the content to you guys.
With it being at 2, with the China race being at 2... I don't know how I feel about waking up that early or going to bed that late.
We'll sidebar.
We'll see about it when we get closer. Yeah. That's not for, like, another month or so we'll see. Maybe we'll have a big party, and everyone has to stay awake with us.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. I'm not worried.
Anyways, on that note, not much else to really wrap up here. I'm very excited for it. I think it's going to be a good race. The reason why I'm willing to stay awake that late is because I am always delusional and am convinced that this is going to be like Lando Norris's first win or like Oscar Piastri's first win.
I am curious to see how much Ollie Behrman, Antonelli, how much all these guys are talked about this weekend. Because
there's been a lot of talk about them recently.
Yeah, there's been a lot of hullabaloo, understandably.
F1 TV did put out what they think the grid's going to look like next year, and I highly disagree with it.
What does it look like?
It was like Fernando going to Mercedes, Carlos going to Aston, Ollie going to Haas or something.
Okay.
But then Zhou not being on the grid, Valtteri still being there, but like being so, I don't know where he is. Like it's just like Checo was somewhere still in there. No, he wasn't. Danny was the second Red Bull driver. I just don't believe that's not in the cards for me.
I have a thought about that.
Go for it.
But I don't want to...
You can say it. It's his home GP.
I wonder if they put Danny Rick there because no one else is going to want to touch Red Bull after everything that's happening. And they want to keep Max happy, so they're going to give Max his little BFF. I'm curious if, like...
He's also a marketing ploy, too. They use him for his image.
And Red Bull is all about the marketing. And I don't see that one...
I think Yuki needs to get out of there as fast as possible. They're never gonna move him up. They've never taken him seriously, which I think is really unfortunate because I think he's a great driver.
I do wonder if there's like a time frame for all these guys that like it's just like if you have so many years.
Yuki needs to go somewhere else. The guys from Alpine, I think both Esteban and Pierre. Nobody knows what's going to happen with them next year, to be honest. I don't know if they're going to stay. I don't know if they're going to go. I don't know if Alpine's going to have a whole change for next year. Who knows? But for Danny, I know it's his dream to eventually get back to Red Bull, but given his performance this year, like, I just don't see it happening at this point in time.
Fingers crossed for the Australian GP that the Aussies do well.
Yes.
You know.
You always want people to do well at their home Grand Prix.
Yeah. It's too, again, I don't want to make predictions, and I'm not going, like...
I'm sorry, Danny, but I'm going to keep saying it for the rest of the season if this is the performance that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few people that I feel like that, but it's too early to call it. Like, I
think Valtteri's going to retire.
That's the thing.
I think both the Haas drivers are going to... Oh, one of the other ones was that Nico was going to be at Sauber.
That's the thing. I think for me, I don't know because there's still too many guys on the grid that I feel like don't want to leave. And then there's too many guys in F2 who want to come up, who are now leaving F2 and going to other racing avenues.
Yeah, I'm really tempted to get, like, a whole, like whiteboard.
Like
and
a serial killer wall?
No. Maybe? No, I'm kidding. No, like little magnets with each of their names and faces on it, and then we move it around and see who we think is going to go where.
It's still too early.
Sure.
It's still too early.
Yeah. I can't see them moving Kimi Antonelli up that quickly, to be honest. It's not going to happen in my mind. I could see maybe Fernando going to Mercedes and then him being like, I'm done, finally, after a million years.
I just can't think about it. There's too much going on currently that I'm like, let me stay on the now and not the...
That's true. All right, on that note, I think that's it for today, guys.
Yeah, well, talk to you after the chaos.
Yeah. All right, bye, guys.
Bye.